Thanks for coming, everybody. I wanted to start. This is a big no-no usually with these presentations. Don't pull a quote and put up on the screen, but it's something that's so, I thought, well-worded. It's well-articulated that I think it's a good way to start this. And it's by Dalai Lama. And he said, man, because I should say he was asked the question, what surprises him the most in the world? And he answers, man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he's so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being is that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he's never going to die, and he dies having never really lived. Very, very important. When I heard that, actually, not that I completely didn't know this, it's just that it validated something that I felt for a very long time. So I should start, I was born in Bosnia, well actually it was Yugoslavia back then, which is a country just next to Italy, right above Greece in Europe. And when I was born, I was privileged, I should say. I was fortunate to live both in a city and out in the country, because my father came from the country, my mother was from the city. I was born and grew up in the city, but I partially was out in the country. And out in the country is where I had some really amazing experiences, because it was a country that's very mountainous, and the winters are pretty harsh, and people still needed to actually hunt, for example, to eat in the winters. So when I would go during my winter breaks, my summer breaks out in the country, it was the greatest time in the sense that I could just leave the house, go have fun, go explore everywhere. I was a big fan, for example, of Mark Twain, his books, because I completely connected with his character. It was very much how I felt about the world. And I also listened to these hunters, and this was a very important experience that I had. It's very primal. It's something that used to be in a world that really no longer quite exists, which is that you would get together basically with the entire tribe or the entire village, and you'd be around the campfire and you'd listen to the stories. This is very important because they would tell stories of what happened that day. And of course, these stories would be total lies. They'd be totally embellished. None of that really happened, but it was a lot of fun. And it was something I wasn't able to do at that point. If the hunting seemed fun, now I wouldn't quite do it. But back then, it seemed like a big adventure to go out in the wilderness, to go out in the middle of nowhere where you didn't know really what was happening. You didn't know what kind of danger is going to catch up with you. So this made me fall in love with storytelling from a very old oral tradition of storytelling. I didn't even understand what's the precise importance of stories quite yet. It's just something that excited me. So anyway, at an early age, I got interested in storytelling. So this is me, and holding a camera. I have no clue what the hell that thing is. But somebody handed it to me, and it was going to be a very important part of my life later. But I should say, when I was in a city, I felt always quite miserable. I was at an early age in a preschool and school, and I thought school to be awful, pretty much, comparatively to what it was out in the country. I loved doing stuff over there. In a city, everything was pretty miserable. I was at home or I was in school. And this kind of 9-to-5 existence back then, although I didn't understand it as 9-to-5, was a real nuisance to me. And I hated it. So in fact, when they would pull me back to the city out in the country, that would be my face. Not pretty. It was, I mean, that would be my permanent face over in the city. So sad to say, what was coming very soon with Yugoslavia would put that face on me quite a while, for quite a while. This guy is called Roger Richards, and he's a photojournalist who went to Bosnia when Yugoslavia fell apart, and there were a whole bunch of wars in the region. And he was covering Bosnia at the time. This was in Sarajevo where I was born. You can see everything is bombed out. This was the first year of the war. And some of the photographs here are his photographs. He was very kind to let me use them in this presentation. I got to meet him, and he was there at the same time that I was. I was just a little kid. I was 9. He came there, and he changed his life forever as well. So the first year of this war, everything was entirely bombed out in the city. So think of those images of World War II. Pretty much you got carpet bombed. So I, as a kid, had to go basically into an atomic shelter at that time. And this was, as you can imagine, remember, I loved the wilderness. Atomic shelter is the worst place, the worst. And it was a place that was entirely dark, and you were in there stuck with 1,000 people. So you're hearing people breathe all the time. And I'm in there for a whole year, which means I better learn how to meditate or I'm done. In other words, I wasn't able to do some basic things that I used to do, which is draw comics. I used to want to tell stories all the time. I wasn't able to quite do that. I had a lot of time to myself, and it built up a lot of frustrations in me and a lot of fears at times. And after about a year has passed in this war, the carpet bombing had stopped, and it became basically a sniper alley. There were snipers picking people off out in the street, so you couldn't quite walk on it. So one day we made it back to our house. We had actually moved inwards in the city as the war began because it was a safer place to be, and my grandmother that day was going to hop into a car, and they're going to go 150 miles an hour to another part of the city where our place was, to grab some stuff and bring it back, because we had to escape really soon, because when chaos comes, it comes within a few days. That's what happened in Bosnia. I went from a stable state to a complete chaos within a couple of days. Within a week, it was an entirely different planet. So anyway, she was going to go, and I told her, I got to go. I've been in a cellar. I want you to go with you guys. And she said, no, absolutely not. Stay at home. Shut up. Sit down, kid. You're not going. So they just sped off. And I had all those feelings that I've been holding for about a year. And they were just rising and rising. And I just snapped basically and said, I'm just going to start running. So I went outside. I had no clue what I was doing at the time. So I started running. And I got to see this entirely destroyed place, this city that I had known. It looked like something out of Dante's Inferno at the time, just completely shattered. So this would have been like one of these kids, like I was. You were just kind of stuck in a dark place pretty much at that time. So I decided, I'm just going to run. It was just this feeling inside of me, and I started running. And started running across the entire city. This is actually, I should say, the entire city, because of the winter, that winter, they cut down all the trees and everything that was possibly be able to burn, they actually cut it down. So the survival was brutal there. So when I started running, it was basically pretty much empty streets. It was a lot of burnt out buildings. It had gotten pretty wrecked. A lot of cars people placed in order to try to shield. So I ran, and I ran, and I ran. And at that time, I had no idea that I was running basically through sniper alleys. That was going, at any moment I could die. I mean, yes, it was something that obviously if you rationally started thinking about it, but it was just something I felt like doing. I didn't care what could happen to me. So I ran through these incredible things that, I remembered as buildings intact, and they were just utterly destroyed. Pretty much the entire place was empty. I ran across the entire pretty much city, and during that time, it was really early in the morning where I left. It was about 5 a.m. I only ran into 3 people the whole time, and all of them were soldiers. They would see me from a distance, because nobody would be crazy enough to be out in the street. So they would all scream at me, like, get down. They would try to, they wouldn't even want to come out. And I kept running, and nothing hit me this whole time. Which was, if you think rationally, if you start to rationalize this, I should have technically been killed 100 times over. There were snipers everywhere, yet nobody took a shot at me. And by the way, snipers loved picking off kids. It was one of their favorite things. If a kid sticks their head out, the civilians were most targeted there, I should say. This was not a soldier versus soldier war. So I ran, and it was literally this desolate place. And I ran all the way to the other side of the city, which is about 5-6 miles worth of this stuff. And I managed not to get hit by anything. You call that a miracle of some sort, but I think I've gotten to learn that it's not quite that it's a miracle. It's just that I've taken a chance when I really felt like taking a chance, and I got rewarded that I didn't get killed, if that makes sense. So I got there. I finally got to where my grandmother was with another guy, and they'd crossed the entire city. It was very difficult to pass through, and they saw me on a door, and they were like, they just couldn't believe that it was me. They had triple take. Is that him? How did you get here? Right? So I told them I ran. So they just had nearly a heart attack, 2 of them. Then they beat the crap out of me. I could barely walk. But they were just shocked. And when I saw their car, and cars often, you drive so fast because you can get a shot out as you're driving it. Nobody shot at me the whole time. So you call it a miracle. But anyway, this started to form something very important. After that, I was out all the time. In fact, I could care less. Every time I felt like going out, I went out. And never got killed. And in fact, we used to play this one game where kids would run between 2 buildings, and this would be a sniper alley area. You see those people run, you can get killed there. So you draw straws, and the kid that goes first is the safest, and then one by one, everybody runs, and you dare the sniper to shoot you. It's a form of youthful resistance. Not very smart. And sometimes you go out and play ball where you can just get blown away. Hey, at that point, you just give up. You just say, screw it. Anyway, the war had ended and I moved to the United States, and you should understand that this experience of war was no longer that 9 to 5, which I grew up with. It was actually, since it was sheer chaos, the 9 to 5 thing went away. So you were living what you call in the present, much like Dalai Lama was talking about. You lived because every moment was heightened emotions, heightened stress, heightened everything. Anything could happen. You were living fully in the present. Now, of course, you can completely devour yourself if you're worrying so much, which happened to some people. But with me, I just said, screw it, and I started moving. So years later, when I was in America, finishing my college, I was doing film mostly at the time. I was still very much interested in storytelling. But I was meeting some of my friends, and some of them as far back as high school. When I got to America and I went back to high school, I started getting that same feeling that I got when I was a little kid. I was like, what am I doing here? And at certain times, it was so miserable that I felt like I would trade in 3 years of high school for 3 years of war. It was that bad. I would rather take living in the present than the 9 to 5 thing. So years later, when I met up with some of these people that I knew in high school, that I knew in college, and they started their careers, I find it interesting. I was on a festival circuit, and they said, you seem to be having a lot of fun with a lot of stuff you're doing, but with us, we get some really good jobs sometimes, but we're feeling miserable. And we're living 9 to 5, that's miserable. Everything's miserable, and often these people are just over-medicated. And you can't tell them that directly. It's like, well, it's what they've kind of gravitated towards, trying to deal with the situation. So I told them, I came up with this really simple idea. It's straight from the war, if you think about it, from that experience that I had, which was, why don't we take one full day out of your life? And I knew these people, they're my friends. They trusted me in that sense. So I told them, let's take a full day and you pick wherever you want to go and whatever you want to do. The only prerequisite is if you're going to try to take the whole day, and we're not going to be looking at the watch. Because believe me, as soon as you start looking at anything like that, you're not in the present. It's as simple as that. So I started this little project where I would just take volunteers. Somebody would come and say, I would really love to try this. Let's take a whole day. I'm not going to look at my watch. I'm not going to look at anything. I'm going to do what I really kind of feel like doing. And often these are kind of fantasies or things that they wanted to do all the time, but they never really got a chance to do. So anyway, what had happened basically is that it was a 2-year project where people would pick a certain spot they would go to. For example, I'm going to use this example here. This was a girl that I knew. She had finished great college, all the places she really wanted to go to. She was at a job that she wanted to do, but she was feeling really miserable. So we met this one day, and she told me, I don't know where I want to go. I don't know what I'm doing. I just put on what I felt like wearing for today. And so I told her, do you have any dilemmas in your life? Give me something so we can maybe work with something. And she said, I have this really big dilemma in my life, which is that I have always tried to kind of make people around me happy, please them, instead of really being myself. So I've structured my life basically according to other people, never really been about myself. So I've been miserable in that sense that I've never really been myself, but allowed to be. So, and I told her, it's kind of like a prisoner of your own mind in a sense. And of course, you're surrounded with certain people, and in her case, quite conservative, old school mentality, where it's like she needed to do certain things, she needed to do this, she needed to do that, she needed to marry this kind of person, and so on. So I decided to go with her, and I said, you know what, instead of picking a place, we're just going to sit in the car, we're going to drive until you find something you like, and we're going to shoot there. And we're going to just talk the whole time. And this was a long day, about 15-hour day. We went to 6 locations, nothing quite was happening. She wasn't quite vibing with any of these places. We just ended up talking. So anyway, at the end of the day, very end of the day, we get to this place. It was like a ex-military base that they had made into a park. So there was some kind of a party in the middle of this park, and in the back of it was this like bunker-looking thing from like 100 years ago, entirely abandoned. It looked so dirty and disgusting that if you go near it, I feel like you can pick up an STD or something. So anyway, she sees this place and she's like, I love it. And I'm like, I could not hate it more when I looked at it. But she's like, I love it. And she said, I want to shoot in it. And she said, I want to shoot nude in it. Now from her point of view, shooting nude, and if her parents find out, and if people, it would be really bad in her case. I could not tell you how bad. But she had this urge. She said, I just needed to release all these things. So we end up, and by the way, I'm looking over there, and there's a party with a whole bunch of kids running around, and she's like, but just do it anyway, you know what I mean? So I'm like, okay. So I ended up shooting some stuff from a distance of her, and these images ended up really very much embodying how she feels. Like this person just stuck in this entirely dirty, terrible place. And I called the series, for you young buffs, I called it Self and Labyrinth of Ego. Anyway, so this is another story I quickly want to tell you. It was, we were to shoot, we had a chance to shoot for only 1 hour, so we're not talking 24 hours now, only 1 hour in Hippodrome in Baltimore. And this girl, her name is Carrie, she picked a theater to be her place, and by miracle, we had met in the same city and had a chance to shoot in a theater, which is very difficult to get to these and to get time in it. And so we had only an hour, so this was about impulsive actions. So she went to the first place she felt gravitated towards, which was the light booth. And then she made her way down, so I shot her all her way down, all the way to the mezzanine, that area, to the upper level, and then this guy actually stepped into the shot. I didn't even know I was shooting him at the time. Only saw this later. And she made it all the way down to the edge of this. It was a very short shoot. But when we looked at the images, she looked at the images as, you know, as they were placed. It's almost like a story being told. She sees something, comes down to the, and there's that guy. He just walked in. It was one of the guys working at the theater. And she started crying, and she said, because she's been a dancer for many years, and a theater person, and she's had to escape, so to say, her life that way. And it was because her father had gotten very sick. He had cancer, and he died. So this was it was an outlet for her. And she said, that person that we're seeing there, that's my father, because it's been between me and him all these years in the theater. So this led to some really incredible experiences on my part of just taking full days. Like, for example, here on Coney Island, we took a full day, and this girl chose balloons as a prop, and not by any mistake or by chance. It was although it was by her gut, it was very deliberate, because if you know Coney Island, it's a very youthful place. It's a place that New Yorkers remember from their childhood as one of the only maybe getaways out of the city. It was the only place where you directly meet with nature, which is that ocean front. And so we had this experience just of being in the place for a day, of not thinking about anything. And of course, these balloons are not floating, by the way, because they're filled with oxygen as opposed to helium. So anyway, this was basically a day of just being in the present, just not thinking about anything. Here, we ran into a giant storm that came down during a shoot, and it was just enormous winds. So much so when she jumped up, she would be carried by it for a while. It was a very wild storm. We sat through the entire storm there. It was like a John Muir over in California when he used to tie himself to a tree, and then a storm would pass through, and he would just enjoy the fact that it was whacking him all over the place. That was his way of connecting with the spirit. So here, we went through that experience of just everything being blown away, and then we got this enormously beautiful, actually double, although it's hard to see from here, rainbow. And at the end, we went to the house that actually this storm had just knocked out. It was a barn, and shot in it. That is in the present. No thinking about anything but the present. Existence in the present. Things as they unfold in the present. And here, this was an interesting little metaphor that happened. It was a guy that chose a tire as his prop, and he was trying to catch the sun with it. And I thought this was interesting because I always thought, tire was invented to try to conquer the sun in a way. We use technology to try to conquer everything around, in a sense, to kind of take control of the universe. And of course, sun has always been a very popular target, especially for men, historically. Of course, catches it, right? Or things like this, these enormously beautiful sunrises or sunsets, things that we don't really experience much. We sleep through these things, but there's something really beautiful about waking up at night and letting things come, letting the sunrise come or the sunset come all the way, just be there and observe it, very important. Or things like this, which was over in Chincoteague in Virginia, where this enormously beautiful thing happened with light, just enormous, kind of almost like a painting of light. Kind of experience you have maybe once or twice in a lifetime to wake up at that hour. Or things like this, by chance, exploring areas and ending up in something that looks like another world, almost. Here was a case where we went out into the mountains of Los Angeles. It was during the spring, and they said it was going to be fog in those mountains. So we went up to shoot in that fog, and we ended up actually stepping into a hailstorm. Nobody saw it coming, and everybody was shocked on the radio saying, this is the biggest thing we've seen in 100 years. We don't have anything like this on a record. So this girl when she sees this, totally in the moment, says, you know, I'm going to walk through this thing. And she starts walking through it, and I stepped out to take a shot, and the hail was so hard that it was hurting my entire arms. I had to like step back in the car like a coward, back in the car. And she's like, why don't you just shoot from it, and I'm going to go down the street. And she was in it for 10 minutes. So I pick her up later, and she's like, so I'm like, how did you like do that? I mean, it was the amount of pain. And she's like, you know what? We only see this once in a lifetime. I was going to live it up. Dangling off of high places, very popular thing to do in these shoots. And to tell you the truth, this was actually where they used to pitch bison over, like send them over Native Americans in order to, one of the biggest hunts in the world was once a year. It would be sent down a hill, and they'd be basically skinning underneath. And for about 6,000, 7,000 years, this was used as a location for that, giant hunting. So very dangerous place, to say the least. But sometimes when you're in that moment, you just don't care. Just bring it. Here, this is walking on thin ice on Boston River, on the river in Boston at Cambridge. This thing should by all means snap at this point. And at that point, me and her are both in the water, and that's, you know where that goes. It didn't happen. Okay, here's another short story. We were in Chicago in one of these abandoned old factories. And surprisingly, we didn't encounter anything there. It was this giant, huge place. But as we were leaving this place, we actually, on the outside, because it was a condemned part of the city, and we had to jump the fence to get to this place. This girl wanted to shoot in an abandoned place. And when we got there was a cop car standing, but the cop wasn't in it. So me, being as smart as I am, I'm like, why don't we just get into the car and get out of here? Clearly he's looking for us, but who cares? So we step into the car, and the guy's running at us with a gun. Like, angry, shouting, stop, stop, stop. So he's pointing the gun, and he sees this girl actually and her sister there. And he calms down a little bit. He's like, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And so the girls are like, well, we're just shooting inside that place. And she's like, well, that's a city property. You can't go in there. You're not allowed. Things can happen. You can sue the city. No, she's angry. And there I was taking my gloves off because of all the asbestos and stuff, right? It would look so bad if I was there by myself. But the two of them kind of calmed them down. And the cop finally comes down and he says, did you guys get all the shots you wanted because you're not going back in there? And I tell him, you know what, officer, because just earlier he said, I thought somebody was dumping bodies in there, right? Because that's what they do in places like this. So I told the officer, me being a smartass, I was like, officer, you know, shooting is easy, dumping the bodies is kind of hard. So these two girls were like, did you just say that? And the guy, you know, I was thinking he's going to get angry, but he actually laughed it off, which was pretty funny. So anyway, I wanted to kind of get to the conclusion with this quote. This is by Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell said, people say that what we're all seeking is meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive so that our life experiences on the purely physical plane will have resonance within our own innermost being in reality so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. What's a rapture of being alive for you? This is a very important question. And to me, and I would say for most people, it's living in the present. Some really powerful stuff in the present. So I will close with this little story, which is here from actually Lake Lanier, up like just up the street, basically from up the highway from Atlanta. So we went to this childhood home of this lady, and she said, "I want to like light a giant fire, basically in her front yard." And she, you know, we lit this giant bonfire and. There was a huge wind, so every time you went near this fire and you kicked it a little bit, it would send sparks everywhere. So she took these logs and would smash them into it and would shoot it back in her face. But before she did that, she was basically dancing around the fire. And then she turns and asks me, what should I wish for? Because back in the day when Native Americans would do these similar dances, it was always to wish for something to come, right? So I actually gave her a quote by a Persian poet, which is a quote that says, it's time to make your heart the temple of fire. Is a quote about Rumi, quote about love. All his poetry is about love. So I was like, if you're going to wish for anything in life, is love, right? So months later, I call her and to tell her that this image had become kind of one of the really important images of the project, that something that we just did on one weekend ended up having a lot of impact. And she tells me, you know, I got to tell you something. The day after we finished, in the following morning when I was returning back home, I met a man, and I'm marrying him today.